Hey there, my name is Alex, I am the Mont, and this is a Dark Souls lore Q&A on the undead enemies, specifically what enemies in the games count as undead or not, figured out through various abilities. Now, I'll admit, nobody asked this question in the comments, at least not that I'm aware of, but I asked it and now I'm going to answer it, so let's kick things off. In Dark Souls there are various abilities, magic spells and the like that only work on undead enemies or hollow enemies. For example, the Undead Rapport is a pyromancy that works in a similar way to mind control or charm from other RPGs. It lets you manipulate undead enemies into fighting for you momentarily, luring them with fire that the living are drawn to, like a moth to a flame. Then in Dark Souls 2 we have the miracle Soul Appease, which inflicts damage to hollows, but only hollows. And let's start with that, shall we? As with Rapport, I'll detail any enemies of note that are or are not affected by the spell. See, for starters, it works on pigs and dogs, which suggests that animals can in fact hollow, at least according to Dark Souls 2's definition of hollowing. It also works on the Primal Knights, the elephant enemies, but only the ones in the Doors of Pharos, suggesting the Drang Lake Castle ones are not hollow, which kind of makes sense because their armour at least is a lot less decrepit. Also worth pointing out, most of the Drang Lake Castle ones come from stone, as if they were petrified or statues coming to life. Almost none of the enemies in Drang Lake Castle are classified as hollows. Not the Stone Soldiers, not the Sign Knights, nor even the Lion Warriors in the woods who aren't in Drang Lake Castle, but they kind of look hollow to me. But most curious to me is that it works on mimics. They are considered hollows, and also undead. See, if we move on to Undead Rapport, I find it curious that it works on mimics. At least in Dark Souls 3 it works on them. So, the third game considers mimics to be undead, and Dark Souls 2 considers them to be hollow. Isn't that a little odd on both counts? For starters, hollows are generally mindless entities, whereas mimics are clearly somewhat intelligent, no? Or is this nature of mimicry so ingrained into them that they follow that behaviour even when hollow? As for them being undead... Monster head resembling a treasure chest. Once an ancient god, it is said this is the symbol of shame imposed on a long-lost clan, exiled for the sin of avarice. Wearing this slightly raises soul absorption and item discovery, but also affects its wearer with the curse of the branded. The very form of this creature is thought to be a form of brand, a punishment for sin. I was a bit confused just now when reading that out. It says, once an ancient god, implying the mimics were once ancient gods? I'm wondering if that's like a translation error, and if it's meant to be saying like an ancient god branded the clan instead of the mimic being an ancient god, but, well, what do you think? Mimics were once undead humans who were punished by Velka, perhaps? She's the god of sin, after all. Transformed by the curse into the enemies we know as mimics. We know that undead and greed or avarice go hand in hand to some extent. The covetous serpent rings are symbols of the undead and represent their greedy little arses. And as we all know, the undead hunter charms are useful against mimics, sending them to sleep so you can freely obtain their goodies. It wouldn't be the first time that human types have been morphed into monsters in Dark Souls. Just look at Manus, and Aldia, and Aldrich, and so on. Also, on the topic of Dark Souls 3, Undead Rapport seems to work on most of the enemies you'd expect it to, but doesn't work on Black Knights. Not that it should work on Black Knights, nor does it work on the majority of the Irithyll enemies, which is interesting. If Irithyll is a successor of sorts to Anor Londo, this makes some degree of sense. Just as the entities of Anor Londo aren't undead or human, so too is the case with Irithyll. But then, in Dark Souls 3, when you're creating your character, I'm pretty sure one of the races you can choose is Irithylian or something like that. But maybe it's more like an offshoot and not a true Irithylian. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, but you know, a person from Irithyll, because the enemies from Irithyll are a lot different looking to humans. They're a lot taller for starters. The Fire Witches, the Pontiff Knights, it doesn't work on any of them. Nor does it work on the infamous Irithyll jailers from the profaned capital. And do you remember the description of the profaned flame? The fire, born of the sky, is said to have incinerated naught but human flesh. That is interesting, isn't it? It does make you wonder, how much thought did they put into things like this? For example, do rats drop humanity purely for gameplay reasons? Or is it that rats have been chewing on corpses, imbibing some of that dark soul for themselves? If not all humanoids are undead, but hollowing seems directly tied to humanity, then why can animals and gods seemingly hollow? Or are there two forms of hollowing? The undead hollowing, which is a lack of humanity, and the sort that appears to have happened to Gwyn, where you just, have your soul deteriorate? But then, hollows appear to be more akin to what undead should be. It is their true, original form. So, who can say? It is very interesting, but also very complicated. And on that note, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you have any interesting or complicated topics or questions in general that you'd like me to cover, leave a comment down below. Until next time, ciao.